know that a few of my subscribers actually have attended a couple of your workshops, which is fabulous. The next one, you're running the 5-day retreat. That's coming up on the 28th of April. And I also see that you're running a retreat from Hawaii next year.
Yes.
I'm assuming that you don't have any concept of the actual subject that you're going to be following in that sense.
There's a format that they generally follow loosely, but what they lecture about is up to them. And by that time, I think they will have completed another book if they're going to stay on schedule. So I don't even know what the teachings will be.
Last time we spoke a lot about you rather than what the guides were coming through with, and that was because I wanted to understand more about you as a man. One of the things that you said actually was that what you do is you show up, and you're really good at showing up.
Well, it's like anything else. I was a college teacher for many, many, many years. And when it was time for class, I showed up for class and I showed up ready to teach. This is similar, except I show up for this willing to be worked with and taught through. So my physical presence and my facilities, whatever those things may be, are required for the work that I do. But what I've learned over the years, and many years now, is that if I'm consistent with this, I am creating an opening that is sustained. It's kind of like, I suppose, the painter that always paints. I suppose the oils stay wet on the palette. You're not having to crack and create every time. I show up ready, and the dictation is ready when I show up. That's essentially the agreement that I seem to have with the guides. If I don't show up, it doesn't happen. And thank God they show up, because if they didn't, I'd never do it again. I'd be scared out of my mind.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. You'd be scared out of your mind, which is all about fear. And globally, we seem to be lurching from one fear-driven crisis to another. The current situation in Ukraine, I guess because it involves a superpower, seems to be terrifying a lot of people. The guides will have a view on this. Can you elaborate, broadly speaking, or in your own terms, about how the guides regard such a global conflict as that one that we currently have?
Well, I mean, they've addressed quite directly in the last few months the idea of borders, and that the greatest and really only problem that they say humanity faces is what they call the denial of the divine, which means us against them, and the consciousness that essentially perpetuates war, which is born in an agreement to separation. War doesn't exist, they say, at a higher level of consciousness, just because war is a fear-based construct. They don't do a lot of predictive work, and maybe that's just my resistance to receiving it. Although about 3 days before the invasion of Ukraine, I was channeling, and the guides came right out and said, boom, this is what's, they didn't name any countries, but they pretty much laid it out. And I was disturbed when I heard the channeling, because the only other time I've heard them be quite that direct about sort of an upset in terms of the global consciousness was right before the, I think it was the 2016 election. It's whenever Trump was elected. 3 days before that, and everybody assumed Clinton was going to win that election. And 3 days before, I was channeling in some, I don't know, nondescript city somewhere. I don't remember where it was. And the guides delivered this lecture, and they said, you think that choice is about, I'll have the milk versus the cream in my coffee, and what you're about to experience is what happens when the table that was holding the milk and the cream gets turned over completely, and nothing is what you thought it was going to be. And I can't say it was a warning, it was a preparation for change. And every time they talk about what's been going on in the world, and they've been doing this for since 2009, which is when they dictated the first text, they've talked about it within a context of a reckoning, or humanity facing its own creations, and that everything that's been created in fear needs to be reseen. So this then becomes opportunity. And they've said, and this is hopeful, that humanity as a whole has decided that it will move through this and lift to a higher level of agreement or consciousness or a vibrational accord, basically a higher level of consciousness, and that this is part of that transition that we're going through, and none of it's necessarily going to be comfortable. And I don't think any of it has been, since the beginning. But I hear this framed in positive ways, just not what we would want to see outpictured as our reality.
Yeah, because as you say, hearing it framed in comfortable ways isn't necessarily what we regard as being comfortable. But fundamentally, people being terrified of the end of the world as the worst case scenario. What you've just said is that ain't going to happen. It's a process of change. Sit tight.
I mean, that's basically how I understand it. But they've said from the beginning, and this is back to the very first book, that we've created weapons of mass destruction under the pretext of keeping the peace. And they say that that's the most insane thing they've ever heard, that you create a bigger bomb to keep more peace. And they've said eventually those things go off. That's what they were intended to do. So I don't hear that happening now. I'm not getting gloom and doom stuff, and I don't. I do hear, I guess you could say, that there's a reframing of our expectations of what reality is going to look like, which I'm hearing again and again is quite something. That we may be living in a world with some different rules than we have, or different expectations, and some of this has to do with other things. Commerce, religion, how things have been structured. And they've been talking about this again for quite some time. And I think they've been pretty accurate if you go back through the books and see when they were channeled. And what was sort of what we were moving into.
One of the things that has always struck me about your work with the guides and how they frame things is this very strong reference to the importance of the individual and to the collective. Mm-hmm. So the belief of the individual, when we, with the kingdom, when we declare to move to the upper room and make that decision that is our choice, and we commit to that choice, then okay, there's a change. But more importantly, the more people that fundamentally take that decision, the better. I guess what I'm getting at is this importance of living being the change that you want to see.
I mean, I'm the vehicle that these teachings come through. I'm like the radio that it's broadcast through. And my consciousness is utilized, and I'm challenged by a fair amount of what comes through me. I can't claim to be the best student of the work. I'm much, much better than I used to be, I have to say, because my life is becoming an expression of the teaching in ways I didn't think would ever happen. But I don't know that I fully comprehend. I'm on my first cup of coffee today. It's early where I am, so we'll see if I can make any sense of this. And what I understand is that finally this is a teaching of co-resonance, and that as we align individually and collectively to a higher level of frequency, for lack of a better word, which is really just alignment, we call to ourselves what expresses at that level. And that we've been operating in a collective field which has fear as sort of an implicit component of what the reality is, so that so much of what we do or expect has a basis in fear because it's been part of the equation. And the guides claim on teaching of lifting to the upper room or the kingdom, which is a level of consciousness. They call it Christ consciousness. I don't think that's a religious term. I think it's a level of tone and experience. They say that, lifting to the upper room is lifting to a level of tone or vibration where fear doesn't hold sway. They say actually fear doesn't express at that level. The guides teach about octaves. They don't talk about dimensions. I almost never hear that word out of their mouth, and I'm relieved, but they talk about octaves. And they say that we're experiencing reality in a shared octave of tone and vibration, and that any piece of music, anything, can be transposed to play or be sung at a higher octave. And the process that they teach is a process of transposition. But when you go to the next octave up, they say fear doesn't align at that level. So when you're no longer choosing in fear or operating in expectation through fear, you stop summoning it and calling it to you. You stop going back to the past as the basis for how you choose your future, when the choices of the past were born in fear. When I said, if the guides didn't show up, I'd be terrified, I was actually joking, because it's when I was young and I began doing this work, I was, because I didn't know what was happening. I started off feeling like I had a tin can up to my ear, and I was hoping somebody would speak into the other end, and the tone would travel through the string, and I'd be able to, access clearly. And then there was emerging, and then it's never been that I've had to go elsewhere. I've just had to tune the dial, and it's just like a radio, you just tune the dial. But I suspect if there was a time when they decided that they weren't going to speak through me, that there'd be a perfectly good reason, and I would be doing something else, that I would find interesting and fulfilling. So, the areas of my life, and I'm sure there are many, that still hold a bias born in fear. I don't want to see war. I don't want to see suffering. I get frightened of what could happen. But I gotta say, I'm much less frightened than I used to be, because I do trust this teaching at that level, that this is great change.
Absolutely.
And when you're in a wave of great change, you don't want to necessarily hang on to a post, or you might get hit in the head with whatever's flying behind it. You have to let go and allow this sort of remaking to occur. And I hear that that's really what's happening for all of us now.
It is very succinct, Paul. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your mental efforts this time in the morning for you. May I just ask, just slightly digress back, coming back to you, and you're now quite settled in Hawaii. It's Maui, isn't it? It's the island, is that right? Yeah. So do you find that you're aware of, because clearly Hawaii is a very different place to New York, where you spent most of your life. Do you find that you actually are aware of any kind of more settled peace within yourself, as a part of sort of basically that lifestyle that you have there?
I do. And I have basically the moment I landed here, which was right when New York City was shutting down. I was living in New York City. I was working in Costa Rica for a week, and New York basically shut down while I was in Costa Rica, and it was clear I couldn't go home. I have had a very deep and powerful personal healing here on this island, and I have never had an experience like that had its sort of basis in a kind of geography. And by the way, this is not the place I ever thought I would want to live. I had no interest in coming to Hawaii, truthfully, and I'm very grateful that I did. But I was met with a lot of synchronicity when I came. And, my two attempts to go back to New York, I just decided against them both at the last minute. I canceled the plane trips. I just stayed, and then I bought a house. Now I'm really staying. So that's it. Now my dog is here. We're both staying. That's what happened.
Yeah, she's lovely. And do you find yourself in the vicinity of Ram Dass's old habitation, old house?
Yeah.
That must be wonderful.
Well, it was again synchronicity. I knew of Ram Dass. I think I read um, one of his books when I was in my early 30s. But I wasn't a student of his work. But I always buy everybody's books and really don't read them. That's been a problem for many, many years. And but I kept hearing about him, and increasingly so in the last couple of years of his life. And I had done a podcast with a student of his who had I guess, a rather large following. And I ended up on Maui, and I was still doing readings online, private psychic readings. And I had an appointment with this guy, and I apologized for the poor internet. I said, I'm sorry, I'm on Maui. The internet's poor. He said, well, I'm on Maui. And it turns out he was 20 minutes away, and he had been one of Ram Dass's caregivers. And really through him, I was introduced to the satsang, and now have wonderful community here as a result of those people who've been very lovely to me. So yeah, I was actually at his posthumous birthday party last night, which was really quite lovely.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think my going back to the work of the guides, without wanting to tax you too much. I know,
sure.
I know it's partly said in jest, but equally, really, all of what your guides are teaching is it could be encapsulated as a journey to the heart.
I think it depends on what your interpretation of heart is. Their teaching, to me, seems to be a teaching of the realization of what they call the divine self. You can call it the indwelling Christ, you can call it the monad, you can call it the eternal self. I don't think it really matters, and I believe its basis and its residence and how we experience it is at the heart center. And so at that level, I would say yes. It's not, I don't think, particularly, I'm going to say this word and use it in the wrong way, so it may be misunderstood, but I don't know that it's primarily an emotional teaching. It's not about feeling better. It's not about, it's not very mushy, it's not even very, very good new agey. It's a little more direct, I think, at times. So, but I do think that they're refocusing us to the aspect of ourselves that knows, and that's the aspect of us that also loves, because the guides have said, and other teachers have said this as well, God or the divine or whatever you want to call it loves through us, and that's my experience of love as well.
Yeah, okay. I caught a very short clip of you on your YouTube channel where you were doing tuning into a young lady podcast. I forget her name. I think okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, quite young, but she was probably 20 or so years old, and you were tuning into her in that level of the here and now. This is it, and picking up on her vibration. And I have to say that what would actually really touched me was your genuine love that you were transmitting to a fellow human being. Are you aware of that kind of emotion? Because you talk about mushy stuff, and I kind of get what you're saying, but when you go into that channeling,
I don't know that it's emotion. I think it's compassion.
Okay.
I think it's love. I taught college for 25 years, and I got used to seeing people when they're 18, 19, 20, 21, their lives are messy. Nothing makes sense. And there I was holding this space, it was NYU students. And in many ways, I learned, I think, love in that situation, which was really, it's a specific kind of love. It's the love of encouragement and support, and sort of seeing past the confusion and the messiness to what's asking to be recognized. In that case, it was people's talent, and their ability to express themselves as I was teaching writing. So I think it's something that was developed through me, but I'm aware of it. And I'm aware of it when the guides really step into me, because when they do it, it's a whole other thing. It's just a trip. I've been told, and I haven't really seen it yet, but I'm assuming it's on film somewhere, is my eyes turn bright blue, very, very pale, pale blue when they step in fully. And the love that emits from them it's devastating. It's so beautiful. You can feel that. And I get to be party to that. But I don't walk around that way. I often say I'm a curmudgeon, I'm cranky. You don't want me behind you on a long line at the bank, So I'm still Paul with his stuff. But I understand what it's like to feel that. That was an interesting interview with Noah Cyrus, who's a singer. And it was very LA, it was a very studio, I got driven to the studio and I'm there and there's all these people in the studio. And I was expecting something sort of lightweight interview. And this kid, and she was probably 20, 21, just sat there in a stool and basically said, "My life's a mess. I don't know what I'm doing. Help." And I was like, oh boy, we're going to go here today. And God bless her. She was really great. She was really open. And I think she heard what they had to say. And the guides came through and they did what they do well, which is teach and love. That's it.
Yeah, no, it was lovely, a lovely piece. It really was a lovely piece. And I mean, it's things like that actually, I think, do more for those cynics out there that just don't get this stuff.
I when I do the psychic work, because they call me a medium for the living, so there are people that may not believe in the channeling and think it's made up or whatever, and I've gotten to the point where for the most part I just don't even care anymore. People are going to think what they're going to think. But if that same person asks me to tune into their sister, who they've been estranged from for 5 years, and I step into the sister and I start to resemble the sister, and I start to hear the litany of complaints that the sister is holding, there's no way I could know that. You can't Google it, you can't, and the physical stuff is really quite interesting. And I like that the guides work that way with me, that I have, because if you think of me like as a radio, I'm just tuning into different stations and picking up the broadcast of consciousness. And so I like the psychic stuff because I think in some ways it validates the spiritual work, that the guides are doing as teachers. And when I do my online stuff, the guides will lecture and then people, will take questions. And many, many, many of the questions that people ask are about their personal lives and their relationships and people that they're, butting heads with or estranged from or concerned about.
As a teacher of writing, as it were, one of the things that I was touching on with Bill yesterday, filmmaker Bill Bennett, was about this idea of, as a filmmaker and as a writer, you adopt a point of view. Point of view as a concept is a very important concept. Equally, this sort of point of view idea and context of information exchange, rather like we're having now. So there's a context of us talking together, and there's a point of view, there's my point of view, there's your point of view. If there was an objective observer, their point of view. The guides have a point of view, clearly. Do you feel that you've got anything that you can say about the importance of this point of view in terms of the power of the subjective awareness that we all have?
I mean, I just know how it feels when they work through me, and they come through as teachers and very good teachers, and they have a better vocabulary than I do, it seems, because occasionally they use words that I think are words, but I don't know if they're words, and I certainly don't know what they mean. And, I trust the authority that they come through with as teachers. So their point of view, I think, is always, it's fairly consistent. It's compassionate, it's instructive, and it's not controlling. They're not telling people what to do, and they're really not teaching in fear. And so that's something that I experience. When I was a writer, in my youth, and I wrote plays, that was all about hearing voices too. Okay. And so, that was really the strange thing about it is I used to, induced trance without even knowing what I was doing, and just sit there and write, so type at the keyboard, hours and hours and hours, and then try to make sense of it.
Right.
And I didn't realize until I was much older, probably in my 40s, people began wanting to talk to the guides in session, and so I started doing readings, and some woman asked about her father, and I had my eyes closed, and so I just tuned into the father, and I heard her gasp, and I said, "What's the matter?" She said, "You started to look just like him." And I mean, I realized it happened every time,
Right.
and that I was really stepping into people. So the idea of allowing a character through was replaced with something really provable. And I mean, so much so, I was on a TV show a number of years ago called The Unexplained, and they filmed me reading for this lovely woman from Connecticut, who they brought to my apartment. I knew nothing about her at all. And all I knew was she was having problems with her son and her husband. And I went to the son because kids are easy. They don't protect much.
Right.
So I tuned into the kid, and then I somatized the kid. The kid had cerebral palsy, which I didn't know, but they intercut me with the kid, and the whole thing, my hand, the whole thing happened. And I went deaf in the reading. And I was going, can he hear? And she was going, I don't know. And I'm thinking, what kind of woman is this? She doesn't know if her kid can hear. Turned out the kid had never spoken. So I was accessing language for someone who had never been verbal. And I do that occasionally in readings. I've been good with people, with locked-in syndrome and comas and things like that. I can access. When they're on the other side, I often don't hear them. I hear them as they were when they had the body, which is really curious.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just such a fantastic example of the continuity of consciousness throughout all of us as human beings. This detached state that we live in is fundamentally connected at that level. Brilliant. I mean,
yeah,
excellent. Really, really good. Sorry, I just want to pick up on that point that you were channeling when you weren't even aware of channeling as a writer.
I wouldn't call it channeling. I'm really a snob about the term, though, and people get mad at me about it. What I was doing was inspired work. I was inspired. I was stepping out of the way and allowing, but I was also crafting and shaping and doing the things that I had been taught to do.
Right.
And I think inspired art is the highest art we generally have. Channeling is literally stepping out of the way. So it's all straight dictation. There's no editing. There's no crafting. In any book, there may be 3 words that I mispronounce, or I'm speaking so fast that I drop an article. I drop an and or a the that we'll have to put in because it's clearly intended. But the texts are just the straight transcripts of the dictation sessions. And I take exception at times when people, say that their channelings are edited, and because I think, well, it's not yours to edit, but if you want to write a short story, that's edit away, and it can be inspired. Inspired work is wonderful. I certainly don't relegate it to less. It's just different.
Do you feel as though the guides regard our existence as a sort of kindergarten position where other beings like them are in charge of keeping us safe?
I've never really heard it that way. I mean, occasionally people will say, who are your guides? And they have, they've answered it in different ways. Teachers, there's a name they use as a collective. But my favorite answer was, we are who you become when you know who you are, right. Which is very simple, and so I think that it's funny, I've never really thought about that. How do they see us? But they often say things like, we see you in your beauty, we see you in your right to be, and all you have known and may know. They have these almost incantations. And they're holding a much higher vision for us, I think, individually and collectively, than we can hold for ourselves, because we haven't been told that it's possible. And because at their level, it's not only possible, it's what's always true. So it's not that they're not disengaging from our pain or our confusion. I think they see it, but they also see beyond it to the essence of who we all are. And that's what they're invoking and summoning in and through us.
And I think that that's the power of it, isn't it? It's the power of our power sits in our ability to believe, in other words, to be inspired, to have that creative thought, to actually then follow through and form, as the guys have said, to create things that are the material world. Mm-hmm. That's what human beings do, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we are co-creators. I don't question that. What I hear from them is that we're always ordering off of the menu that's been handed to us, the things that we think we can have. And consequently, we end up sort of perpetuating problems as opposed to moving into the present moment where the new or the potential for the new can be made known to us, which is, I think, what they're inviting us to do now. Because, we're only going to claim what we think we can have or hold. And one of the things that I think that we've not been told we can have, or at least we haven't listened to it, because I think probably all the great spiritual teachers have probably said it. But, the kingdom, the guides say, is our inheritance. They say you don't have to earn your inheritance. You don't have to earn it. It's yours because you are. That's the gift of being, but you have to take it. And we don't take it because we don't think it's real, or we're allowed it, or we don't want to be disappointed, or we must be terrible and sinful and awful. So yeah, we do our best. That's all.
So this is the time for people like you to be standing up and showing the way through teachings like the guides that provide, so that actually we are expanding our horizons and accepting that other things are possible.
I think so. I may never understand this. I really don't think of myself as special, or I have a skill set which is really interesting, and I do understand that. But I'm somebody else who's just showing up for this as best he can. And, I have problems, and I have concerns, and I have many, many, many questions, and so be it. We all do. I don't ever think that they're disavowing our human experience or our humanity. I just think they're offering us something that we can have. But it comes at a cost, and it's the cost of who we think we are and what we think we're allowed. And that's a big, big, big leap. It is for me. It is for most everybody that I meet.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you said earlier on, we're letting go of that support over there. We're not yet catching on to this support over here. We're lost in that. Who are we? That identity crisis that we can feel as we change. And so, yes, that in itself is scary, but there's no need to be fearful, is what I'm hearing from you and your wonderful guides. Paul, I thank you for your time. I'm going to let you go, sir, and have a lovely day. And thank you very much for taking the time out this morning. I do greatly appreciate it. You're welcome here anytime. Sir, I'm going to keep calling you sir.
Paul, no need. Well, thank you for having me back. I enjoy it. Okay.
No, thank you. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.